was the idea that started G2, and why did you decide to go after this particular industry?
Status quo was kind of analyst reports from the likes of Gartner and Forrester. And as you know, they don't update those very often. And I just remember it took us 9 years at BigMachines to get a Gartner report, 12 years to be the leader. And I just thought there had to be a better way for entrepreneurs to validate their solutions.
Did this resonate with your co-founders? Like, were they bought into this pain point that people had?
But when I first had the idea, I also bounced it off a couple Silicon Valley VCs. Everyone was kind of skeptical. They're like, I don't know if that's going to work in the enterprise. And I remember I actually got all the way to like Alfred Lin at Sequoia, but I couldn't close anyone. We didn't really have anything built yet, just on the idea. People were like, the idea was fascinating and intriguing, but there was also no analog.
What's changed in the advent of AI now? Like, how has that changed the way that you think about the business over the last like 4 or 5 years?
I think the modern buyer now, we do surveys, over half of them are now starting in ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude. They're no longer starting in Google search. I think that game has totally shifted. Now today it's what people are calling AEO, answer engine optimization, or some people are calling GEO, generative engine optimization. Because just like at the beginning, I said, hey, we're going to disrupt Gartner. Now there's probably some startup saying, we're going to disrupt G2 with AI. And we're like, let's try to do it ourselves. So we're building G2 AI with whole new AI first user experiences, and frankly, also supporting MCP.
What is the one thing you think founders have kind of get nailed right in their kind of first pitch?
Well, Godard, very excited to have you here at the first pitch. We've done a quick background on your role, but you've obviously had a tremendous career leading and building G2, which is kind of a built to last company, as we like to speak here. Would love for you to do a quick intro and background on what was the idea that started G2, and why did you decide to go after this particular industry?
Yeah, no, and Patrick, great to be here with you. And I do love talking about entrepreneurship, so excited to share more about G2. But I've been an enterprise software entrepreneur now for 26 years. And before starting G2, we built another enterprise software company called BigMachines, which eventually became Oracle CPQ Cloud, so configure, price, quote. And so we kind of saw firsthand the pains of selling and buying enterprise software. And frankly, we were frustrated by the status quo. Both it was really hard for our customers to discover apps like BigMachines. And BigMachines, initially, we were more of a CPQ for manufacturers. But those manufacturers, when they wanted to find a CPQ solution, they had a really hard time finding us because this status quo was kind of analyst reports from the likes of Gartner and Forrester. And as you know, they don't update those very often. And I just remember it took us 9 years at BigMachines to get a Gartner report, 12 years to be the leader. And I just thought there had to be a better way for entrepreneurs to validate their solutions. And I also thought there'd be a better way for buyers to discover. And when we started G2, back 2013, it was really SaaS revolution was really starting and kind of in full bloom. And we also thought, wow, there'd be thousands or hundreds of thousands more apps. So also this buyer discovery problem. And for a SaaS buyer, how do you trust the vendor? Because also in SaaS, we tend to be very good marketers. And so we thought, what would really be the ground truth? It would be other customers, sharing their authentic experiences with the software. And so at the beginning, we called it Yelp for software. And that was really the beginning. How do we bring real-time user peer reviews to our world of SaaS?
Yeah, and we're a G2 customer and very much appreciate the lift that we get from all of our customers leaving great reviews on Clarify on G2. And it's funny, we were on our first Gartner report this year as well. And I definitely remember kind of that song and dance with Gartner and Forrester back in the Amplitude days. So yeah, very much appreciate what you built and the value that it's provided us as a company. Talk to me a little bit more about going from BigMachines to starting another company. You could have done anything. Why this particular problem? Why this particular team? And you kind of assembled the all-star team to work on this as well. Like, how did you pull them all together to get them excited about building kind of this Yelp for B2B SaaS?
Yeah, and first, Patrick, no, thanks for your great Clarify reviews. And we did build a G2 for entrepreneurs like you. And I know you have a next generation AI first mindset to totally disrupting CRM. So glad your customers are vouching for you on G2. But back to the beginning of G2 and what gave us the idea. And we wound up, kind of as founders exiting BigMachines in 2 stages. So in 2011, we did kind of a growth recap of the company, and we sold 51% to private equity. And frankly, I kind of soon realized a couple of quarters after that, I didn't love really kind of having a boss, which it felt more like in private equity. I was used to being an entrepreneur and really setting the strategy, doing what I want. So it was kind of painful, but I left BigMachines about 2 quarters after we did that recap. And then the private equity firm kept me on as an advisor for about a year. But then after one board meeting, they didn't want much of my advice, but I helped transition to the new CEO. And then I kind of had a year off essentially to just reflect on, what I really want to do with my life. And it was kind of interesting time because I honestly, like, I was kind of depressed. And my friends, at the time I was living in the Chicago suburbs where we built big machines, they kind of couldn't understand it. They're like, hey, you just made a bunch of money. You're kind of on a paid vacation. Why are you unhappy? And I kind of asked myself the same question. And my wife noticed, like, I was having a hard time getting out of bed, and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" And then all of a sudden, I realized I really missed building a company. I missed that sense of purpose, and probably I especially missed having a team of co-founders to work and grind with every day. And so I decided, a few months into that, I'm like, "Hey, I want to build something else." And then this idea of building G2 just kept coming back to me. So honestly, I just felt like our industry was broken. It felt unfair. And they say the best entrepreneurship is when you kind of scratch your own itch, solve your own problem. And I'm like, there's just got to be a better way for enterprise software, for SaaS apps to be discovered and validated. And I just kept coming back to this idea. I'd wake up in the morning and I kind of, I was just in my home office, started building a pitch deck, and the idea wouldn't leave me. And then next thing I decided was, how do I build it, right? And then I went back to my best friends at BigMachines. And that was one thing, at the end, BigMachines was successful. We had well over 300 employees, and we probably hired hundreds. And, but I went back, and first, actually, I remember talking to Mark Myers. There was like some kind of, I think it was actually, they had like a goodbye party for me at BigMachines. I remember I kind of followed him to the bathroom. And, cause I think at the time I was also like technically under non-solicit, but it's like, "Hey, Mark, I might have an idea. Let me know if you want to talk about it." And he followed up because I think one of the things I learned at BigMachines, honestly, our design, our UX kind of went off the rails. It was kind of a SaaS 1.0, and we didn't hire Mark until the end. And I'm like, oh, if I build something else, I want it to be beautiful, intuitive from the beginning. So that's why I talked to Mark first, because he was the best designer we ever had. And then I talked to Tim. He was our head of product at BigMachines, best product leader I ever worked with. Then I talked to Matt. He was our CRO, best revenue leader I'd ever worked with. And then we recruited Mike Wheeler, who was our best young engineer, as our CTO. And so I was kind of lucky. I got, what I thought were like the four perfect co-founders with different skill sets, and we would have a great team to hit the ground running. And luckily they all joined, because I think what they also missed, we're all very much entrepreneurs, right? And then I think soon thereafter, actually BigMachines wound up getting acquired by Oracle. And so then that obviously, for a lot of our alumni that wanted to be more entrepreneurial, it was pretty easy to kind of get the best people to join us.
Yeah, and so you got the crew back together, right? These are people you'd worked with before, which makes, the founding journey, like I've worked with my co-founder now across 3 different companies, right? Like it's easy to work with him, and we enjoy getting along and know how each other think. I mean, there's this quote that you had, which I like, which if you're buying a $50 dinner, you could read hundreds of reviews. If you're buying 500K of software, you have to get called paid analyst. When did this kind of did this resonate with your co-founders? Like, were they bought into this pain point that people had here?
I think very much. And I think that quote might have even Tim Handorf, kind of our product co-founder, I think he even came up with that.
Got it.
And I think the same thing, right? Why can you get more information on a $100 hotel room on TripAdvisor than you can on a $100,000 CRM? And we obviously thought
Yeah.
that was kind of absurd. And frankly, we thought the traditional analyst model is almost like a restaurant critic that can't eat the food. The analyst would be standing outside the restaurant asking the diners, "Hey, how's your food?" We're like, why not just ask the diners? And but I remember when we started, there was skepticism around it. Even like eventually we did get, VCs like Excel, Silicon Valley VCs. But when I first had the idea, I also bounced it off a couple Silicon Valley VCs. Everyone's kind of skeptical. They're like, I don't know if that's going to work in the enterprise, like this consumer idea. I don't know. Like, I think the idea wasn't a no-brainer because, yeah, people just weren't sure if this consumer shopping idea was going to work in enterprise software.
How'd you guys go about funding? I mean, I know you had some success with BigMachines. It's my understanding that you all self-funded, or you personally put money in along with your co-founders. Why did you decide to do that versus taking outside capital? Where were you at from like did you have a product and at the time? And I'm curious also, when you all kind of came together, did everyone just quit their jobs at Oracle and then, they said, "Hey, I'd like to come along with you," or did you it was a little bit more kind of piecemealed in a different way?
No, I mean, ultimately, we all quit our jobs. And actually, and we were lucky, right? Like BigMachines, I mean, we did a good recap, and then it was acquired by Oracle for 400 million. So we were actually able to fund most of like the seed funding ourselves. And we didn't try too hard. Like I said, I did do a couple of VC pitches. And I remember I actually got all the way to like Alfred Lin at Sequoia, but I couldn't close anyone. Like, we didn't really have anything built yet, just on the idea. People were like, the idea was fascinating and intriguing, but there was also no analog. At that time, already SaaS was breaking out. And everyone's like, what's your subscription economics? What's your LTV to CAC? And we were like, honestly, we don't even know how we're going to monetize G2, because it's like a marketplace. And, obviously Glassdoor was emerging, Yelp was emerging. So we're like, but we first, it's like building any marketplace. Honestly, it's harder than building a SaaS product because you can't just sign up a customer, deliver software, prove ROI, right? You need both sides. And really, G2, we realized the hard part is a three-sided marketplace. One, you need the reviewer, the expert, to share the insights on the software. And once you have the review, then you can get the buyer. But we also realized we want to be different from Gartner and Forrester. All their stuff's behind a paywall. You have to subscribe as a CIO. Our whole idea was, let's make this like B2C consumer shopping, right? So we have to make the advice free. So we're like, then we had to build a buyer audience and just get buyers to come and read these reviews and be like, wow, G2's valuable. Until we could get to the third part of our marketplace, the software seller, which is ultimately where we realized the monetization was, and probably no different than Yelp. At the time, like, it's free to you as a diner to figure out where you want to go eat, right? But then they monetize by providing marketing solutions to restaurants. And G2 in some ways is similar, right? We ultimately monetize by providing marketing solutions to the software vendors. But first we had to have review content, then we had to have a big buyer audience, and only then could we monetize. So it was a hard business to get that flywheel spinning and get the monetization spinning. And I think that's why we actually kind of felt like we almost had to self-fund to prove the concept. And it took a couple of years to get the flywheel spinning at all. I think, and actually it was funny, my co-founder, Tim Hindorf, I mentioned earlier, the other thing he said was, he's like, I'm not getting a haircut until we produce some revenue. And he grew up in Iowa, so he's like a farm boy. He's more like clean cut by nature, but he started looking like Jesus, like wavy hair down to his shoulders. And it wasn't the best look, because I think it took us over a year to get our first dollar of revenue. And our first dollar of revenue actually wasn't even scalable. But at the very beginning, we also tried just creating, first category we did was CRM software. And we did CRM because we were at BigMachines, we were a Salesforce CPQ partner, an
Yeah.
Oracle Siebel CPQ. So we kind of knew the CRM world. We're like, let's test it there. But then I think the first monetization we tried, we're like, oh, there's a premium version of this CRM grid, as we call it, our version of the quadrant or the wave. And we made it downloadable, but we said you had to pay us like $100. And I remember at the time we put Braintree, because this was almost like before Stripe. And I think we didn't even realize for a week we had any revenue because I was doing the accounting and I was looking at our QuickBooks online, and all of a sudden like $100 like positive amount of cash showed up. I'm like, what's this? Oh, wow, we sold a report, so then Tim got a haircut. But then we also realized that business model didn't really work. So it was a long time till we could actually have any meaningful revenue flywheel. Probably took at least 2 years.
And it's amazing because like you look on the outside and G2 looks like such a successful startup, right? These days, right? Clear product market fit, clear leader in the category. You had successfully exited a company, you had a great team behind you. You're working on a relatively new problem that hadn't been seen by VCs and required you to go self-fundraise, required you to kind of take this leap and go build the marketplace. What point did you decide, okay, now that we've done this, there is enough positive traction here to go back out to market and raise venture capital?
Yeah. And the journey actually kind of got even more twisted in a way, our entrepreneurial journey, because honestly, like 2 years in, we were still barely doing any revenue. And so then my co-founder, Matt, and I mentioned he was our CRO at BigMachines, and myself, I'm honestly I became at BigMachines kind of more of a go-to-market CEO. I kind of had to, I had to run sales and marketing. And so Matt and I, we actually kind of left G2 2 years in and decided to go build SteelBrick. And this was after Oracle had bought BigMachines, and we just saw this adjacent opportunity. We're like, wow, there's a vacuum now in the Salesforce ecosystem because, BigMachines was now gone. And then, so we decided to build SteelBrick, which was just like a Salesforce platform, Salesforce native CPQ. And we thought, wow, we could do CPQ better. And we could monetize it quickly because that was like the boom days of SaaS and cloud. And then frankly, we said, Tim, like, why don't you we made him CEO of G2 because we're like, and he's had a product. We're like, hey, you're going to be better at actually really tuning the platform, getting this marketplace spinning. And we stayed on the board, but it was kind of like, Tim, here's the keys. Good luck. We're going to go build SteelBrick. And then Tim and team, and our other two co-founders also stayed, Mike, our CTO, Mark, our designer, and they iterated like crazy and they did get the flywheel spinning. And then back to VC, we didn't even proactively try. Like we just found it. We did take in some Chicago money because we were in Chicago. And so we had like Chicago Ventures and Mike Gamson. I don't know if you ever met him. He was actually the head of global go-to-market for LinkedIn, but he always lived in Chicago. So we had some like local angels. And we had JB Pritzker invest. He's now famous as the governor of Illinois. But it's just like locals. And they were like, oh, you guys are successful local entrepreneurs. We'll give you some money. And honestly, like Chicago tech isn't that big an ecosystem, so we were kind of unique there. And then we didn't even try to raise venture again. But then I remember by 2017, all of a sudden we got an inbound from Excel, the Silicon Valley VC firm.
Yeah.
And what they said, they're like, wow, we're seeing G2 now in all our entrepreneur pitches for SaaS. And every SaaS entrepreneur had like slide 3, because they weren't getting Gartner, they weren't in Forrester, but their slide 3 was like, we're winning on the G2 grid. We have the most reviews, the happiest customers. And they were like, wow, this is a really cool concept. And they reached out to us. And by then, Tim had done such a great job. We, with minimal capital, we'd gotten, I think probably 3, 4, 5 million run rate. And we'd gotten, probably about 20 software categories spinning. And so then, Excel actually decided they wanted to invest. And actually, I was at Salesforce at the time because SteelBrick had quickly turned into success. Within 2 years, we sold out to Salesforce. And I was at Salesforce doing an integration of SteelBrick, and that was actually going very well. But I also, the Excel also called me, and I knew a couple of their partners, Kevin Effersey, Ping Lee. We were actually like business school classmates many years ago before that. And I asked them, I'm like, hey, is this for real? You guys really interested? They're like, yeah. But they were like, hey, we'd be even more interested if you came back. And obviously, as an entrepreneur, I'm like, Salesforce is great. I admire Mark Benioff, incredible entrepreneur, incredible mentor. But I decided, hey, I'd rather go back to G2 and build. And so then we got, I think it was about 20 million. And then we were kind of off to the races from there. And then we really started to scale G2. But those first 5 years, and obviously without Tim and Mark and Mike, we would have never made it because it was, such a hard, long slog.
Totally. We'd love to jump into the
I know
deck.
that, yeah, let's jump on the deck. Yeah, so, I mean, by the way, what a crazy story to just leave, come back, and also start an amazing, successful company in the Salesforce ecosystem. But yeah, I'd love to see the deck and show us what the
Yeah.
first version looked
And I
like.
think I sent you guys, this is actually the 2013 Chicago Ventures deck I mentioned.
Yeah.
And they did end up investing. And so it'll be fun to share some of that with you.
Has anybody ever seen this before?
I don't think outside of Chicago Ventures and G2. So I think only like my co-founder and
So
them,
this'll
because
be a
as you
first.
know, yes. And I hadn't looked at it in years, and I kind of chuckled. I thought it was, hopefully you all find it entertaining as well.
No, it
Because
was
we didn't
great.
have a lot of substance, so you'll see it was more of an emotional pitch. Yeah, so when we started G2, the vision was G2 Crowd. And G2 is also a term for military intelligence. It's the general's intelligence staff in the U.S. military. And it's also a colloquial expression in military. Give me the quick insight what's happening in the battlefield. And that's the idea with G2 Crowd. Give enterprise software buyers or SaaS buyers the quick insight from the crowd of users. So that's why we call it G2 Crowd to start. And the other reason we call it G2 Crowd, honestly, we wanted to call it just G2, but the G2.com URL was taken. And we did buy it after our Series C, but it cost us $750,000. So that's why we called it G2 Crowd to start. So that was kind of the story behind the name. And we did call it, the vision was the Yelp for the enterprise, to get those real user reviews out there for enterprise software.
By the way, before we go to the next one, how important, I mean, this concept of finding an analogy, was it important to you just to find something that people can relate to? I mean, it's a common, it's always discussed, like, hey, what's the comparable here? And everyone's trying to find it's the X for Y. Or I'm curious how, for founders that are listening in, how important was that concept as you were kind of thinking about how you want to pitch the idea?
I think it was very important, because it just helps people get it. And Yelp at that time was very successful. They'd just gone public. And frankly, it was before, I like to say, Google went evil on them. But they obviously were very hot IPO, the first ones to do local business restaurant reviews. So it was great to be associated both with a hot company at the time and that, really brought that review concept to life well. So I think it worked really well. And maybe the other thing to mention on the cover slide, we kind of also had our anti-message, and this was inspired by Mark Benioff. And Mark, you might remember in his early days, he had the no software message, which, and he put that on every slide at Salesforce because, he's trying to draw the contrast with cloud that, unlike on-premise software, you don't have to install it. And that was kind of our thing. Obviously, we admire Gartner as a company, but we just said, hey, it's a different model. Kind of like, hey, no analysts. Let's get real truth from the crowd. So that was slide 1. And then, we did start with the founding team because honestly, I thought the best part of our pitch was, we had made BigMachines a success. Company was acquired by Oracle for $400 million right around that time. And so we were quote unquote proven entrepreneurs. And since it was a brand new concept and also gave proof that we knew enterprise software, the market we were trying to change. And so we did start with the team. And I did believe, hey, these are the best 5 co-founders you could have to build this company. Because I mentioned we had Matt, who was an incredible CRO. helped me build BigMachines from the ground up. Tim, he was our product leader at BigMachines, helped me build BigMachines from the ground up. Mark, he joined us later at BigMachines, but like I said, we didn't have great design until Mark joined us, and Mike was our best young engineer, and we thought he would be the perfect kind of hands-on coding CTO, and so that's why we started there with the team. And then we also talked about maybe what was unique was the culture, because this was our second company, and part of what I also sold my co-founders on, and the first thing we did in my basement, I remember our first meetings were actually, at the time I was living in Chicago area in the suburbs in Lake Forest. Our first meetings were in the basement of my house. And honestly, before we even 100% picked the G2 business concept, we talked about what kind of company we wanted to build. And I met this entrepreneur, Chip Conley. He built a hotel chain in San Francisco. Then Chip was the head of hospitality for Airbnb. So helped Brian Chesky really scale Airbnb to global leadership. So obviously incredible entrepreneur himself. And he wrote this whole book. I went to a Stanford entrepreneur alumni reunion, and he gave this presentation on peak cultures. He'd written a whole book, and I just loved it. And so we adopted his peak mantra as our cultural mnemonic. And the idea was we really wanted to build a culture where we had inspired employees, evangelical customers, and proud investors. Because, big reason to build another company, like I was kind of sitting at home depressed, and I'm like, oh, we really want to build a company with a culture we enjoy working in. And so that's why we started with this peak culture. And later we turned it into our mnemonic for our values, performance, entrepreneurship, authenticity, and kindness. And so probably a bit unique, but that's kind of what we started our pitch with. Hey, is we have a great team and we're building a great culture before we even got to the business idea. And then the business idea, the problem, the pain we were trying to solve was vendor analyst relations. And The Sopranos, you guys may have watched it, but it was certainly, in the early 2000s, great show on HBO. And I still love The Sopranos, Tony Soprano. And, but I think this is, to me as an entrepreneur, and frankly, there's a lot of software entrepreneurs and maybe software executives, sometimes what the analyst game felt like. It was like, you will pay me, but like, it kind of in some ways felt like extortion. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you have to pay me to get my time, to get my access. So I say nice things about you. It's kind of like buying protection. And this was a big problem. Frankly, we wanted to change for ourselves personally. And yeah, I think Tony did a great job. We're like, we kind of wanted to end this shakedown. And we did, early on, we talked to some CMOs. I won't say which CMO this was, but all the CMOs seemed to agree. They're like, yeah, it'd be great if you guys disrupted this. And we also saw, there's obviously the vendor perspective on the industry, but we also saw for software buyers, frankly, and you can see the woman sleeping there, but, they get all these boring pitches. And frankly, I was pitching software myself. I remember I'd pitch at like G Energy, our BigMachines software. They did buy, they bought our CPQ, but honestly, there'd be like 50 people in the room for like months of demos and RFPs and RFQs. And frankly, the process was kind of boring, for everyone involved. And we thought a ton of wasted time. And so we got, like as a VP of IT from Siemens, but they also said the same thing. They're like, yeah, as a buyer, it's really hard to cut through all the noise, sit through all these demos, RFPs. It's kind of a waste of time. There's got to be a better way for software buyers to discover and trust apps. So that was the basic pain we wanted to address. And the solution, very much inspired by the consumer internet. And by 2013, the consumer internet had really changed. And I was old enough to remember, like I went to college, graduated in 1993, graduated from MIT, and I went on a tour of Europe with my best friend one of my best friends from MIT, Randy, and we used this Let's Go Europe guidebook, which was great. But sometimes I remember we showed up at a place in Prague, some kind of a youth hostel, and had great reviews in the book, but it was closed because it closed 2 months ago. And obviously that's a problem with these books, right? They were always woefully out of date. And obviously in consumer world, things like TripAdvisor, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Yelp, they changed that. And we were kind of amazed our industry of enterprise software was still beholden to books written by analysts, that were probably at least 2 or 3 years old. So we just thought, wow, there's got to be a more consumer-like real-time way to validate products and allow this consumer shopping experience for enterprise software. That was really the solution idea that we came up with for G2 Crowd. And you can see here's the early screenshot, like this was the alpha beta. You can see G2 Crowd beta we built. And we did test it on CRM. You can see we quickly got 500 Salesforce reviews. The way we did that, we actually went to Dreamforce 2013, just put up a booth, and we're handing out $5 Starbucks cards to people walking by Dreamforce. We're like, hey, please write a review of Salesforce. And we got 500 reviews and kind of were able to prove the concept that, we could get good user customer voice, good advice to buyers. And so that was how we started building the product. And one of the things we also built in for trust was LinkedIn. And you can see here, Ben Doyle, Shane Anastasia. Funny, actually, I knew both of them because we also used our own LinkedIn networks to recruit our reviewers. At the beginning, it was a very non-scalable model, right? Like going to Dreamforce, handing out $5 Starbucks in person. Plus, we were pinging all our friends on LinkedIn, including Ben and Shane. Like, hey, we have this idea. Please write a review. But we used that to prove out the concept, and it did work for CRM software. And then we were able to prove that once we had good content, we were able to get traffic. Just this one category, you can see 30,000 visitors a month. That was kind of a big deal for us because obviously starting from zero, and we were seeing massive 45% month over month growth in visitors. So we're like, wow, if we create this, buyers are interested in these reviews. So it was a good like proof of concept that we built. And then we also decided we wanted to go a step further. We wanted to disrupt the quadrants, the waves, traditional analysts put out. And but we said we want to do it differently, right? And we called it a grid. And the big difference was it wasn't going to be based on human opinion, but it was going to be data driven. And we had two dimensions we saw in today: satisfaction that's going to be based on reviews, and the quality, recency, quantity of customer reviews. And then the other dimension was scale. How strong are they in the market? And that we were going to base on real-time public data. Being able to, on social sites, LinkedIn, Twitter, Google, Alexa at the time, determine, how strong is this company in the market. But the big difference was our grid was going to be live and updated based on live data. It wasn't going to be like published every 2 years and 3 years behind. And we got some good validation, like Ben Doyle, VP of Sales, Austin Terradas, where he said, wow, these peer opinions are really valuable. And so we were able to prove the concept. And then we were able to do our first monetization, where we actually got some of these vendors. You can see there, Salesforce, Workbooks. Workbooks was actually the first customer for licensing and reusing this CRM grid in their own marketing. And they were a small vendor out of the UK. They were more of a disruptor. And they were like, wow, we're desperate for validation. But then what was amazing to us, even Salesforce, for their demand gen, decided to buy it because they're like, wow, this is great. This is user driven, and we can use this gated content to drive leads. So that was how we also proved our first monetization. And of course, in our pitch, we did, I think that the press, like TechCrunch, they actually found this idea interesting, the idea of a Yelp for software. So we were able to get some decent media coverage, probably punching above our weight, because it was an interesting idea that was resonating also with, the enterprise tech and kind of startup press. And, then we did start to win some big customers around CRM, HubSpot, Salesforce. HubSpot also really liked G2 because frankly, at that time they were SMB only. According to Gartner, HubSpot didn't even exist. So they loved this concept right away of using user voice versus using, kind of enterprise analyst opinion. So that was the initial monetization. And we said, wow, it's a massive market. Obviously, the 85 billion was a massive swag. But the high level pitch, as you know, we're like enterprise software SaaS is huge and it's going to keep growing. And in hindsight, we were right about that. I think today the enterprise software market, I don't know, yeah. And especially now, got to include enterprise AI, right? It's probably 400 or 500 billion. And that was kind of our bet. We're like, hey, if we can, and yeah.
I was gonna say, Godard, where do you feel
Patrick,
like you were wrong? Where do you feel like you were wrong in this pitch? Like, you looking back, over a decade later, like what held true, what didn't hold true here?
I think it took even longer to grow the business. You'll
Yeah.
see my revenue forecast slide in a minute. So I think, honestly, the concept, I think we were spot on. And even the solution we were building, but in hindsight, it took us longer to get to revenue scale than we had in this pitch in 2013. And we'll get to that in a minute. But it turned out to be harder and take longer to build this business than we expected.
Yeah, I think that's probably the same for most founders and entrepreneurs, probably underestimate the complexity and the time it takes to get to PMF or revenue. Like, what advice would you give them when it comes to either building their pitch deck, how they operationalize that insight, anything that you do differently here?
Well, one, I think just having the mindset of perseverance.
Yeah.
And yeah. And I think, but like, I'm like trying to think back, like, what could we have done differently to go faster? Like, I'm honestly not sure.
Yeah. Well, I think perseverance, right? We talk about grit, determination, perseverance, right? These are all good qualities of an entrepreneur. Like, were there things that you saw that you try to foster amongst your team? Were these like inherent traits and qualities? Were there things that you did that, given that it was taking longer to get to the revenue and having kind of ups and downs, like what do you feel like held the team together for so long until the point where you kind of had this like hockey stick growth?
I would say, I think one of our mantras was buyer first. And really, ultimately, we were there to serve the software buyer and make the world of software better. And so, and I remember also we used, we'd use user research tools to get a lot of buyer voice, get a lot of buyer feedback, because that was like one that helped us make the platform better. And two, that's what even helped us believe, because frankly, our service was free to the buyers, but hearing from buyers like, wow, this is useful, this is valuable, here's how you make it better. I think that's what kept us to believe to get to keep going. Whereas the seller side, the monetization took longer, but it gave us that belief that we're actually creating a valuable product or service. And so I think that's what allowed us to, frankly, to not quit and then ultimately make the platform good and useful for the world. And so that was a market opportunity. Then competition, we definitely said, and obviously it wasn't direct competition. Like we didn't want to hire better analysts or better researchers, but we wanted to kind of disrupt that whole model, with this Yelp-like online model. And we did have a bunch of startup competitors. And looking back, GetApp, we actually wound up just acquiring because they were acquired by Gartner Digital Markets, which we just acquired like a decade later. But it is kind of satisfying. There were over 10 startups in this category. And looking back, I'd say, well, we're definitely the winner, by every measure. And that's probably true in every category. I'm sure you're seeing this now, Patrick, right? In AI first CRM, you probably have 50 competitors. That's normal in every good category. Right. I've also learned as an entrepreneur, if it's a good idea, you're never the only one to have it. And then obviously history gets written by the winners, as they say, because now like people would say, oh, Mark Benioff invented the cloud and cloud CRM. And he certainly was part of that. But I remember in 1999 when he started Salesforce.com, there were like 50, at the time it was called on-demand CRMs being started. So any good idea, you always have competition, right? If it's a good category. And then ultimately you just have to out-execute your competitors. And in hindsight, we did that. But at that time, we didn't even really know. And some of our competitors later, like Capterra, actually wound up also acquiring, but some of them weren't even emerging yet, but it's always interesting looking back. And then we did have a plan to roll out by categories. Like I said, we did CRM first because we knew that. And then eSignature helped us. And we kind of wound up executing on this. Obviously, today we have all these categories and more. It probably took longer, though. Because this said by December of 2013, we'd have them all. Honestly, I think that probably took a year or two longer till we just had all these categories spinning. And now we have over 2,000 categories. But like the strategy was right and we did it, but it took probably 1 to 2 years longer to actually get all of this done. So the idea of going from 1 to, I don't know, this is like 20, it took a lot longer. But we did ultimately get it done. And then the revenue plan, this was like the biggest thing I missed, because it said 54 million in 2017. And honestly, we missed that by 10x. I think in 2017, we went up like at 5 million. So I think this was all shifted out. 2 or 3. Well, this was probably like maybe 2000. We didn't even quite hit that in 2016. So the monetization took much longer. And today we're well over 300 million. So eventually it became a good scale business, but it was a much slower revenue ramp than, we had in this pitch.
When you look at this deck as you're kind of going through it, you're like, man, I probably should have changed this. Anything that you look back and other founders that are watching, you're like, here's what I would have done differently. Or you feel like, hey, I mean, obviously it landed and it worked. So maybe it was the best pitch at the time. But curious, as you look back, would you have changed anything?
I honestly and like I said, I mean, what we did change, like Matt and I left, because we were probably too heavy on the go-to-market side of the company. And we corrected that in 2014, because when we realized, we're not going, that's when Matt and I went to Pacific, because frankly, this was still like below 1. And having like a proven CRO and even like a scaling CEO, like we were too much overhead. You know what I mean? So, because I don't think we could have forced the marketplace flywheel much faster. None of our competitors did either. So I think it just took a more patient approach. But that's kind of what I would say looking back.
I know a lot of founders are fine doing this slide, because they're like, what's the point of this slide? It's like, it's all made up. Right. Now that you look at it back and you're like, hey, clearly it's hard to hit the plans you set out. But do you think like actually doing the work of like actually thinking about what the path is good work, is like something important for founders to do? Or do you feel like, hey, because these slides are kind of like, you can laugh at them even for VCs that look at it, you're like, I don't know, who knows, right? Everybody's like, oh, I'm gonna get to 100 million in 3 years. Like that's the new version.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth doing. Obviously you shouldn't spend too much time on it, right? But it's worth spending a day on to build a spreadsheet. And we did build on, as I mentioned, we had a couple of these vendor deals. So we had some proof. And honestly, this is the only line item that worked. That whole research subscribers, like what I mentioned about buyers paying a premium, we never made that work, right? So it actually only this line item wound up working. But I think it's worth doing. because you have to have a thesis for how you're going to make money. And then obviously you have to hold yourself accountable to proving it out. So it's worth doing, but it's obviously not worth spending, like a week building a financial plan. And especially today with Claude, right? Like I think you should have a thesis based on where you see the ability to actually make money today. So it's worth doing, but just not worth spending too much time on. And VCs know that anyway, right? As you guys know, and you probably pitched, like they want you to have a thesis for how you're going to make money, but they're going to know probably all the assumptions in your spreadsheet are somewhat wrong, and that's okay. But it's still worth writing down how you think you're going to make money.
And Godard, you mentioned obviously Claude here. So what's changed? Obviously,
And that
what's changed in the advent of AI now for G2? You obviously all were able to capitalize on the AAO movement as well. Like, how has that changed the way that you think about the business over the last like 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, no, and it's changing everything. Because also our whole like the way we got this marketplace going was really ultimately through SEO on CRM software. We started to rank on Google, and that's how buyers would discover us. Because when they would Google best CRM software or Salesforce versus HubSpot, we would rank on all those terms like top 3 SEO. So that was a great way to get the buyer side of our marketplace going, and then to get the vendors to care about our audience. And today, I think that game has totally shifted. Today, it's what people are calling AEO, answer engine optimization, or some people are calling GEO, generative engine optimization. 'Cause I think the modern buyer now is probably, we do surveys, over half of them are now starting in ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude. They're no longer starting in Google search. And so I think how G2 content also now shows up in the answer engines. And one of our mantras now is win the answer, because now if somebody's prompting, hey, like I'm building a startup, what's the best way to build my CRM? And frankly, like, I think your reviews could show up there because we are finding the AI engines, they do love user generated content. It's also been, like Reddit, for example, they did huge licensing deals with Gemini and with ChatGPT because the answer engines love training on authentic user generated content. And so that's really how we've pivoted now to the marketer. We're saying, yes, you still want to win on G2. You want the grids, you want the ratings, and some humans are still going to go there. But probably even more important, you got to win the answer on the answer engines and user-generated content on a trusted domain like G2. And user-generated content now includes reviews, includes FAQs. But having all of that on G2 will actually influence the answer engines more so you can win the answer. And so that's been brand new in the last 2 years. And we have partnered with another startup called Profound. You might have heard of them, but they're one of the emerging leaders in answer engine optimization. And that backing from Sequoia became a unicorn in just 2 years, growing super fast because they provide all the analytics to help you assess how are you doing at winning the answer. And G2 now, we've totally pivoted, going all in on that, as well as we're reinventing the G2 experience. I mentioned we went from G2 Crowd, actually .com, then we went to G2.com. Now we also own G2 AI. And if you go to G2.ai, we're also reimagining. We're kind of saying, hey, let's do it ourselves. Because just like at the beginning, I said, hey, we're going to disrupt Gartner. Now there's probably some startup saying, we're going to disrupt G2 with AI. And we're like, let's try to do it ourselves. So we're building G2 AI with whole new AI first user experiences, and frankly, also supporting MCP and CLIs, because we're also realizing, the AI software buyer, they may not even come to G2.com. They may not go to G2 AI. They may just be working their Claude Cowork or in their, Codex, and they're just going to prompt there. And we have to make sure our content, our insights show up where the AI buyer now is. So it's really a whole new game. And so it's both exciting and challenging. We really have to reinvent, G2 now for AI. And maybe just to conclude this pitch, the last thing we had here was headcount and expenses. And frankly, the one smart thing we did, we also didn't ramp. This also got pushed out 4 years because we kind of stayed around 18. And then maybe we went to 16 when Matt and I left. So we kind of kept this flat until we had the product market fit. So this also got shifted out. We were 3 years early, but I'll stop sharing the pitch. But it was a fun walk down memory lane for me as well, to see how we told the story in the early days.
Gooder, that's great. Really
So
appreciate
one
you.
of my oh, go ahead,
Go
Patrick.
ahead, Shamrock.
I was going to say, if you had one slide in that deck that you're like, and I know you get pitched, you're also an investor and as angel investor in a lot of startups. Like, what is the one thing you think founders have to like kind of get nailed right in their kind of first pitch? And as you look at that your deck kind of reflecting back on your first seed deck.
Yeah, I do think what was good was the founder market fit. And I think that comes before product market fit, right? But like, is this team of founders, do they have unique experience, passion to solve this problem? And I think we conveyed that well, with like the Sopranos, like it was personal to us. We personally had the pain. And we also knew the customers, we knew the buyers. So I think we did have, very good founder market fit. And that obviously comes before product fit, right? And I think we had the passion and the perseverance to get it done, right? And I do think that's why Chicago Ventures ultimately did bet on us. Obviously we had little proof, and frankly, they were willing to make a bet that the Silicon Valley VCs weren't, on this unproven model, because they said this team, they have the passion and the determination to solve this problem, and it's a big problem. That's the other thing I think you want to do, like very early. Like, is this a problem worth solving? And everyone, I think we were right about this too. Like, SaaS is going to grow, enterprise is going to grow, and if you can be a big influencer of enterprise spend, that's a valuable company. So those basic ideas were right, and I did think we did get that across. To get some early funding.
Well, Godard, I really appreciate your time here. I want to be cognizant of it. What's the last piece of advice that you'd give to a founder who's thinking about starting a company in 2026?
Well, I think 2026, I mean, the great thing you have now is AI, right? And as I said, probably to build that revenue model, it took me a day, 2013. Now you can probably do it in 20 minutes with Claude. So you have much better tools, not to mention coding. We had a really smart young coder like Wheeler, but it probably still took him like a week to launch our first page. Now you could probably do that in 2 minutes, so you can build so much faster. Of course, I think what's harder is to stand out from the noise, because so many more people are building, because it is so much easier to build. So I think having a really passionate, persuasive pitch, and really having that founder market fit, like really having a problem you really care passionately about, and you're going to fight like crazy to break through. I think and you're in a unique position. You have unique insight to solve this problem better than anyone else. Like, I think that's, really what it takes today, so that you can stand out, because in every category with every good idea, I mean, you're going to have 1,000 other startups competing with you. So you got to be more passionate. You got to be more focused. You got to be more committed to solving that unique problem than anyone else, if you're going to win.
Well, Godard, thanks so much for your time. For folks who are listening, anything that they can help you with, where can they find and learn more about G2?
Yeah, well, one, hopefully a lot of founder entrepreneurs that are building with AI. One, list your product on G2. You can do it for free. Patrick's done it. He's getting great reviews, but I think it's a great way to help you build your brand, help you build your AO, help your demand. So that'd be my one ask to the entrepreneurs. And obviously you're all software buyers as well. And I'd also say, give me feedback, how we can create a better AI buying experience now. And I'm available at Godard@G2.com. Love hearing from entrepreneurs, love hearing from software buyers. And I'm on LinkedIn, so Godard Abel. So hopefully I'll hear from some of you. But thank you for hosting me, Patrick.
Godard, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
All right.